Hello, I'm Ben. Welcome to the channel. So it's been a while since I've been active on here, so just getting back to it. I've had some surgeries and been out for a little while, but I felt pretty aggressive about the subject matter that we're going to talk about today, just because it's the blind leading the masses and it's not working out well for the masses. So what I want to talk about is Chicago and the fact that it's an open war zone. And statistically, it's worse than if you compare year to year in Chicago versus the Iraq or Afghanistan wars that we were in for the last 2 decades. You'll see that the murder rate and the casualty rate in Chicago is well past those 2 wars, not to minimize the death of any American. And that's kind of what I want to call attention to. So today, it's on the news everywhere. Trump wanted to send the National Guard to Chicago to help the police there try to get this under wraps. The numbers from Chicago are striking. But what I find interesting is when you start searching this online, you have to really get into it to determine which source you're going to use, because there's a lot of BS in Chicago statistics. So the suggestion is, in some of the modern statistics, is this year is actually performing better than last year. And actually, this is the worst year Chicago has ever seen when it comes to homicides and shootings. So let's talk about this for a moment. People talk often about, Trump's not my president, etc. And a lot of times, speaking specifically of black communities, I grew up in the South. I grew up in South Carolina. The school I went to was 70% black. The area I lived in, we grew up, everybody was everybody. I mean, we played football together. We were all friends. I dated some black chicks when I was younger. And where I come from, my Aunt Lulu was black. So it's one of those things where it's not segregated as you would think it would be, being the South. And what was funny, when I was a young man and was traveling up north, when I was on communal buses or vans or shuttles, whatever it may be, you hear people talking about the South versus the North. The thing that I kept hearing over and over again was basically talking points that were over 100 years old. What I think the biggest difference in the South versus the North is, in the South, the Constitution is very valuable to every individual citizen. The points I want to call out about Chicago that are so serious is these are American citizens that are being slaughtered. Okay? There was a gentleman today that I watched. He did he interviewed 3,000 people over the last week. True people that live in the city where the crime is so bad. Not live out of the city like your mayor, not live out of the city like your governor, the two that say they don't want the president and National Guard to get involved. But think about this. The homicide rate there is greater than in the last 2 wars we fought in, and we don't want the federal government to get involved. And it's been that way consecutively. For the last 13 years, the crime rate has been increasing every single year, and Chicago leads the entire country in violent crime. Chicago actually leads the majority of the world in violent crime when you look at that, except for areas in Central and Southern Africa. So let's talk about that briefly. And I'm trying not to go on for too long because there's tons of folks out there that would have an opinion around this. But here's the statistics as of today on the shootings from August. So in August in Chicago, 31 were shot and killed, 171 were shot and wounded, and a total shot were 202 in August. Okay, that's 1 month. Total homicides in that month was 34. This year to date, here's where the numbers are just so striking. Shot and killed in Chicago is 236 people. Shot and wounded in Chicago is 1,071 people. Total shot was 1,307. Total homicides was 283. And people like to blame the guns and not the people. Here's the problem with the laws that Chicago has on firearms and guns. The only people that can have guns in Chicago are criminals. Right? The gun laws are so tight. And if you look around the country and stop thinking about who you voted for, look around the country and look at the facts. The Democratic Party, they're leading people straight to hell. If you vote for people in the Democratic Party, you're voting to have your family members killed at an early age. If you look at Chicago right now, that mayor and that governor have no interest in doing anything to protect the black citizens of Chicago. And I say that because the majority of the victims from this crime are black folks. I don't say African American or Chinese American or white American. I don't say any of that. I'm an American. I was born here, so I'm an American. I assume that every other person that was born here is an American as well. So I don't go into any of the political nonsense about subtitles and all this jazz. And I think what we need to think about is when you're talking about how people vote, divide and conquer is a weapon of war that's been used for millennia. Okay? When you divide a group of people or groups of people by their politics, this has been something that's been studied greatly. When you think about Philip II of Macedonia in ancient Greece, he was one of the first people that actually openly spoke about how to take over other countries and said that divide and conquer was how you do that. Chicago is one of the finest examples of this because all of your governmental elites and all of the rich white people that vote Democrat, they don't live in the cities where these kids are getting killed. They don't live in the streets in the neighborhoods where these kids are getting killed. They live in the nice stuff across Wicker Park, right? Over there in Lincoln Park on that side. They're not living in the same area that has this body count every single day, okay? And this past weekend, there was 43 people shot. 43 in one weekend. Here's what some of the guys that are considered OGs, all right? These are bangers from the 80s and 90s that are grown up now. And if you look at these interviews, you'll hear these guys. They had a reason for the violence that they did, even though that still seems archaic and you don't hurt other people. What they're saying, though, the point is what is the most disturbing thing. They're saying now these kids are just shooting people just to shoot people. And one of the shootings that happened just this weekend, 3 gentlemen, all black men, were shot. All 3 men were in their 40s. 2 of them died. One of them's in critical care right now. Just over the weekend, they were at a barbecue hanging out in a yard with family members, and some kids just drove by and just popped off and shot people at random. That's the point. So here's how I'm leaning on this subject matter, and I pray this be how everyone looks at it. I don't look at us as different, black or white or man or woman or anything else. What I look at is there's good and there's evil. There's Christian and there's non-Christian. If you're Christian, you don't murder, you don't rape, you don't kill, you don't steal, you don't do these things because they're wrong. If you're not a Christian, then you can murder, rape, kill, and whatever else because you're serving Satan if you're not serving Jesus. That's how it works, okay? It's my opinion. You don't like it, I'm sorry. Everybody's welcome to their opinion, but I'll tell you this. Texas doesn't see the same level of violence. Okay, I've worked in violent places. I've done things around the country in violent places, but that's not where I live. I live in Texas, okay? And so I'm not doing this as a flex, but there's a difference in Texas. In Texas, I carry this on my person every single day. It's my legal right. I carry that on my person every single day when I leave my house. When I leave my house, I am strapped legally in the state of Texas. I think most people should do that. Why? At any given point, should someone want to try to practice violence against me, I have the God-given right to defend myself. In Chicago, these citizens can't even do that because they can't own that firearm I just showed you. Or there's a limitation to a magazine. So a gangbanger slides by, he's got a 32-round magazine, he's popping off till he gets tired of shooting. They can't hit anything, but they're shooting at mass, so that's how they're hurting so many people. You're limited on rounds, you can't carry a weapon, and people don't understand that's not what America's about. You should be able to defend yourself. And when the only people that are armed in your city is the criminals, that's a problem. And here's the other thing. This weapon right here, I can't even have in the city or the state of Illinois. All right, so this is not something that can even be owned. I've got several. That one stays loaded by my bed in case something pops off in the middle of the night. The point here is not to flex, because most guys in Texas, black, white, Hispanic, doesn't matter, have the same situation that I have. They keep themselves protected. They protect their families the same way too. But also, when you look at the way that the government has gone after the black families or the Hispanic families in these places that vote historically Democrat, there's nothing that's doing anything to serve you and protect you. Remember, when you talk about the Bible and talk about Bible verses specifically on fighting evil, right? 1 John 5:4 is talking about overcoming the world. And in that, it says basically you try to overcome evil with good. And you have to do that through the substantiation and spread of your faith. Okay, so that's where you're looking at all the struggles in life and you see the problem as another person, as long as you keep doing that, you're not going to get around it. You're going to be stuck in the same situation. It's spiritual warfare where you're fighting good versus evil. And right now, in places like Chicago, we're losing. And you have a president, whether you voted for him or not. Okay, look at D.C., guys. If you don't believe that this is an issue that someone should pay attention to, look at D.C. D.C. sent the National Guard in. The citizens of D.C. are loving it. The crime statistics there are ridiculous. It's gotten so much better in such a short period of time. To give their community support, to put these things in place, other than soft policies that let people get bailed out of jail with no money. There's no cost to it. That's what your mayor and that's what your governor's doing in Chicago. The criminals, they're keeping them on the street. Now, why would they do that? Why would they do that? If you continue to elect those people, what's the risk? There's no risk for them to keep criminals on the street. There's no risk. And frankly, I read a book that was written in the 50s. Okay, in the 50s, there were specific programs that went after attacking certain people. The natives of this country were one, where they were basically going out and pushing infertility products on these folks, poisoning their water, poisoning the food they were eating. You know, these medicinal programs to have it where they couldn't reproduce. The same stuff was done on black communities. And what the divide and conquer thing says is basically if you keep a community edged against itself, then it'll eat itself. You don't have to worry about keeping the population under control. It itself will keep that under control. If you look at, I'm going to get on a soapbox here because I hate this for the citizens of Chicago. Chicago used to be a beautiful town. It's kind of like New Orleans. You know, when I was a young man, you go to New Orleans, you could walk the street and you smell jazz. You hear jazz and you smell the food. The food was incredible back then. Now in New Orleans, it smells like a urinal. It literally smells like piss, and there's strip clubs everywhere. The jazz music that was great is gone. You have some people trying to carry it on. I think there was one bar the last time I was there that was still actually playing some live music all night long, and it was pretty good stuff. But what I'm saying is Chicago used to be that. Chicago used to be a jewel. You used to have great jobs in Chicago. You have a great opportunity in Chicago. All that is left, and more stuff is leaving. So when you think about the commentary around, should we let someone come in and help us secure our streets when your city has become the worst yet again, and it's been increasing for 13 years in a row, maybe you want to think about that. Okay, maybe you want to think about that. And if you vote Democrat, or if it's your family members that live in these neighborhoods, maybe you want to kind of listen to who's saying you don't need the help. Look where they live. How does it differ from where you live? That's, I think, the biggest thing about this. You know, I heard a gentleman say earlier today, if Trump's a racist, he's the worst racist that's ever come along. I agree with that. Because if you look at his cabinet, it's the most diverse cabinet there's ever been. If you look at the people he puts over programs, it's the people that had the education and the background to allow them to run those programs because they had success and stuff like that elsewhere. So it is a government that actually is set to be successful. And you wouldn't hear that. I'm not a fan of any politician. At the end of the day, they're still politicians, right? The difference in Trump, and the reason Trump has such a fan following, is because he's not a career politician. He's not a lifetime politician. He's not even taking the salary. He's donating it. So when I say that, he's a successful person that's been successful outside of politics. When you have people that have been in politics their entire lives, they're not going to go to anything but politics. They want to just keep that job because they got to have that job and have that power because they can't be successful outside of politics. Okay, so that's what you have to think about. And when you talk about the tools that they're using to keep each other at each other's throats, this divide and conquer, realize this has been tested time and time again, one generation to the next, in countries around the world for millennia, okay, for centuries, for tens and hundreds of centuries. This has been practiced across the world. So if you have somebody that's studious and reads a good bit, they can look at these thoughts and use that for good or for evil. But in the end, that's what you're dealing with. So if you're too focused on the politics of one person over the other, and you look and see what you're getting for what you voted for, and if that's the neighborhood you want to live in, then keep voting the same way. But if you want to make a difference, then you have to change your thinking. You have to change how that is. And so let's say this. If you look at the world like I do, where there's two divisions, Christian and non-Christian, then that makes it very easy. Is it evil? Well, what's evil? You got the 10 Commandments. Start there. If people are openly doing things that are against the 10 Commandments, then you're pretty much in an evil spot. If the people you run with do things that are against the Ten Commandments, then you run with a questionable crowd. You yourself might be an evil person not knowing it, because this is what you're used to, or this is where you came up. I believe that anybody can make anything in themselves they want. Okay, I came from a place that was poor, where people had those two choices. I was talking about a gentleman just the other day that was one of the best football players I ever saw. I trained with him back when I was in high school. I was one of the strongest guys there. He was about 6 years older than me. And since I was that strong, I got to train with him. And he was a fantastic football player, one of the best I've ever seen. He went to a college that I went to, played ball for them for 2 years. He kind of got shafted because there was a pro guy's brother there that was playing, and they kept starting the brother over this gentleman, both of which were black males, right? I mean, so they basically ran him out of college. And the next time I saw him, I didn't even recognize him. Crack was a big thing back then, and he got into that, first dealing it and then just using it himself, because he left school angry about the football situation. And the next time I saw him, he weighed about 135 pounds. The next time I saw him after that was at his funeral. So where I come from, it's not about race as much as it is in big cities. That might be hard to think or hard to agree with if you don't know how things are done in the South. And, Texas, that's one thing that I love about Texas. Texas is a melting pot, right? It's one of the greatest states in the country. If you look at the way that Texas makes money, if you look at the number of jobs that Texas has created year after year, if you look at the amount of wealth that's created here in Texas year after year, it's amazing. It's a great place to live because it's mostly conservative thought. Here's what conservative means, guys. It means that most likely you're a Christian or you have Christian values, which means you could be a Muslim and have the same values. You can be a Hindu and have the same values. Basically, all tenets of most of the major religions that are practiced around the world have the same ethical understanding. So it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, if you're looking at it from a religious standpoint. You don't have to be a Christian to be a good person. Most religions, like I said, have the same ethical beliefs and the same idea of rights and freedoms, right? So the Constitution in this country is the greatest Constitution in the world. You would have people make you think that's not the case. However, look at England right now. Look at Europe. If you say something that the government doesn't like in Europe right now, they'll put you in jail. If you're an American that says something, you put it online and you go over there, you could be in threat of arrest in a country that's supposed to be our ally. Think about that. Think about that. The first thing they did in England to limit people's power was take their weapons away. So when people talk about the Second Amendment, it's not just about love of guns. It is what that represents. If a burglar is trying to break into your house knowing that you can't legally own a gun, he's a lot braver, a lot more brazen to break in with his gun, because he's a criminal. He's got a gun because he doesn't follow any laws, right? However, if a burglar's breaking into a house in Texas, he knows there's a high probability he might get shot. Okay? And then the other piece of that is most people in Texas can shoot, which means he might get a dirt nap. Okay? So when you think about these things, here's what I say to all this. Good and evil, that's all there is. Okay? When you're letting people divide and conquer and segment you down into a smaller group and not focus on the fact that good and evil is all that matters, when you get old like me, you'll figure that out. Okay? So give yourself some time and you'll figure that out. But when you look at soldier statistics and casualties in the U.S. military, it was 2,456 military members that died in the Afghanistan war. 2,456 in a 20-year war. Total shot this year, 1,307. Total homicides this year, 283. Remember, that's 20 years. Wonder what this number will be like in 20 years. Only one way to find out, right? Keep doing what you're doing. Don't change. You'll have the same situation. I'll say this. If you spend any time reading the Bible, spend any time in the Bible, whether you're a Christian or not, there's concepts of good and evil there that you can study very quickly. Read the book of Deuteronomy, the book of law. And in the book of law, it tells you what you do with certain criminals that do certain things. And then look at what happens in Illinois if you do the same crimes that Deuteronomy is talking about. There's no capital punishment. There's no being extreme about correcting folks so they don't do it again. One of the things that I think is excellent, John MacArthur is one of my favorite pastors. He just passed away this year, and he wrote tons of books, which I'll be studying for the rest of my life. There's probably 40 of them sitting on my desk right now that I just bought. I've got another 12 coming in this week. Because his teachings are biblical. He goes through the Bible word by word, verse by verse, so people can understand it better. And he's actually in California. Okay, and he was the guy that stood up. You've probably seen him. He's been on a bunch of different TV shows talking about who Jesus is, who he really is, and what Christians should be expecting. But one of the best things that he says in this book specifically, this is Jesus Unleashed, is the persons or people that Jesus had the biggest problem with were false preachers, false leaders, people that tried to make situations more important than the people that were in them. Right now, that's what's going on in Chicago. Chicago, we want to say that we don't need the president's help, the National Guard's help to protect our citizens. Yet every week in Chicago, children are slaughtered. Slaughtered. And I'm sorry, a 14-year-old boy, no matter how much of a man he thinks he is, he should not be shot to death in front of his house when he's bringing his sister in from a car. That just happened today. Okay? So if these things don't bother you that way, then reassess what's bothering you and why. And here's the thing about government. Government is the biggest evil on the face of the earth. Okay? And especially our Congress. It's one of the worst group of folks on the face of the earth. They've done more things that are atrocious to our people and to people around the world than any other group that's still around. And I say that because if you study the last century specifically, governments were responsible for the majority of deaths in those period of times, even more so than natural death. It's amazing how many people the governments killed from 1900 to 2000. Okay, so when you look at things that way, you start to realize when you back up a little bit from your local situation and you start looking at the world in a little bigger picture, you can kind of see things for what they are. It's a little different. And here's the point I want to make. God cares about every soul. Jesus weeps for every single soul that dies and leaves this earth and goes to hell because they don't know him. Okay? Understand that your individual soul, you have one soul, and what you do with that is extremely important because it's important to God, right? God put his kid on the cross, put his son on the cross because he wanted to save you. And if that's not the mindset, you're looking at things like Chicago and you're looking at things like your Constitution and who you vote for. If that's not important, then maybe you need to reevaluate. As you get older, some of those things will change because what is important to people as they get older is I want my rights to be respected. I want to be left alone to do what I do. I'm good. I'm not a bad person, so I don't need help being a good person. I'm already there, right? And then what you do is you hold yourself accountable to continue along that path and be faithful. And you stay in your Bible and you understand what the Bible says you should do in these situations. If you don't do that and you're led by something else, then you're gonna create more opportunities for things like Chicago to happen. So one of the verses in the Bible that stands out, it talks about the devil. It talks about the coming of evil, right? And it says the devil is a lion walking around seeking out to whom he can devour. Okay? It doesn't say who he wants to hurt or trip up. It's who he wants to eat and kill. Because the more people that fall under the devil, the more people go to hell. And see, he betrayed God and stood opposite to God. Jesus said, either you're with me or you're against me. There's only two paths, right? There's only two paths. One takes you to heaven, one takes you to hell. The Bible says the road to hell is wide. The path to heaven is very small, very, very, very short, very tight, right? Not a lot of people are going to make it. When I was a younger person, I thought that meant majorly the Christians were going to heaven, the non-Christians were going to hell. But as I get older, I start to realize that actually a lot of people that think they're Christian are going to go to hell because they're listening to false teachers. And they don't understand what the Bible is or what Christianity or God's expectation for Christians actually is. So here's a great book to read if you want more of that. It's Jesus Unleashed. That's by John MacArthur. You can order this online. I think it cost me $4. It's a short book and it's a quick read. It's something that's useful to you. But in the meantime, keep praying for us here at the channel. We wanted this to grow over the next year. Keep praying for the city of Chicago and pray for the government. You know, when Jesus came, they said the government would be on his shoulder. if the government would take heed and act like Christian people, then they would have a better chance of being a little more successful. That's what the Bible tells us. We have to resist the devil. James 4:7 talks about that. It says, submit yourself to God and resist the devil. When we pull that up real quick, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Okay, submit yourselves therefore before God. This is James 4, verse 7. Submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. If you're in a situation like Chicago, it's because you're not resisting the devil enough. Okay, and folks, your mayor is betraying you. Your governor is betraying you to say that there's not a situation there that is it's a war zone. Chicago is a war zone, and it has been for the last 13 years, and it was before that too, but the last 13 years it's just stepped on the gas pedal and gone far beyond everyone else. So something to think about. Sorry, I saw this today. Don't want to get on a soapbox, but I think, as people start thinking more for themselves and stop allowing themselves to be grouped up and pushed aside, that divide and conquer that we talked about earlier, you become more focused on what actually matters. Good and evil is what matters. And what's going on in Chicago is evil. Just get the Ten Commandments. You don't have to be a lifelong Christian to understand what I'm saying. You don't have to even be a Christian to look at the Ten Commandments. Look it up. Just say, look, what's the Christian Ten Commandments? And it'll pop that up. It's in Exodus. And it'll tell you exactly what God gave to Moses to share with the people. And this was written by the hand of God too. And one of the primary things about being a Christian, it says, remember my Father's commandments. That's Jesus telling people that before he left and told us he would be back. So that's kind of what you want to look at. Ran a little long in this video, but it's an important topic. Hopefully with the resources I've mentioned, and I'm not trying to flex on anything. There's something that's got to happen. Kids need to be safe in America. Okay? In America, this is the richest country in the world. Kids should be safe to play outside. Okay? Old ladies shouldn't have to worry about getting murdered in a parking lot at a grocery store. Okay? 3 gentlemen in their 40s at a family barbecue shouldn't have to worry about some kid driving by and lighting them up and killing 2 of them. A 14-year-old bringing his sister in shouldn't have to worry about getting shot in the head in front of his grandma's house. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And all these people I just mentioned are black people. Did you hear me say that? No. These are people. These are Americans. These are souls that God cares about. At some point, when you stop all the noise, that ultimately is what matters. Okay? If you like this and subject matter such as this, please like, please subscribe, please share if you think somebody else might enjoy this video. That's all for now. I'm Ben. Be good.